So I'm thrilled to be sitting down with Phil Knox, who is the head of Gospel Impact for the Evangelical Alliance. And I'm delighted that Phil is going to be speaking. He's our keynote speaker at the Evangelism conference coming up in October. So Phil, you are an evangelist and you are a missiologist. I'm going to ask you in a moment what a missiologist is. But first, just tell us about your heart as an evangelist.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Nick, what a brilliant joy it is to be sat down with you. Also, so grateful for your friendship. Can't wait for the conference in October. But as an evangelist, really, I remember becoming a Christian when I was 6 years old. Someone told me that I could be forgiven for my past, that I could know God with me in my present and hope for the future. I thought this was the best news I'd ever heard. I remember as a 6-year-old being more excitable then than I am now, responding to the gospel. And really ever since that moment, all I've ever really wanted to do is see more people respond to the gospel, know the grace of God, know the salvation of Jesus, and become Christians. And so remember as a kind of teenager, really wanting to see my mates get saved. As a student, the same. And so that heart for the gospel, I feel, is something God's given me as a gift ever since I can remember being a follower of his. And so, yeah, now that kind of works itself out with the great joy of serving at the Evangelical Alliance and wanting to see the whole UK church equipped and inspired to make Jesus known.
Okay, so that's your heart as an evangelist, but this term missiologist, what on earth is a missiologist?
Yeah, so I guess a missiologist is a student of mission. Yeah. So I love obviously seeing people come to faith, but I guess behind that, I guess we're a bit of a kind of strategic evangelist. You know, we as evangelists, we can't do it all ourselves. And I think there's something about the gift of the evangelist to the church that doesn't just seek to do it all and preach the good news single-handedly, but to equip and inspire the church to do that. But also taking another step back to ask the really serious questions as to how do people come to faith? How can we study well the pathways through which people become Christians? And really to help the whole church be as fruitful as we can be in this area. I think wherever you're at as a leader, wherever you're as a Christian, we have limited bandwidth when it comes to our relationships, when it comes to our finances, when it comes to our energies. What I seek to be is someone who studies those pathways so that just to help the church ask really good questions, to discern those journeys to faith so that we might be really fruitful and strategic and effective in investing our energies well to see the most people win for Christ.
Just picking up on that thing about pathways and how people are coming to faith in Britain in the 21st century, you led an important piece of research, the Finding Jesus research. Just tell us a bit more about that and what you learned from that about those pathways for people coming to know Christ.
Yeah, so my role at the Evangelical Alliance has been to kind of take a bird's eye view almost of what God is doing across the whole of the UK. And so over time, we pull together the various bits of research that look at the kind of openness to the gospel, look at church attendance, look at the kind of openness and trends and what's happening. But where there's gaps, we seek to commission our own research. And so a few years ago, we decided that we really wanted deeper insight into how adults are becoming Christians. So with a team from the University of Durham, we tried to find as many people who'd become Christians as adults in the last 5 years and to get them to tell us their story. Now, what's interesting is at the time we were looking, the team from Durham basically said, you need 100 people to make this worthwhile for the data to be robust. And we actually found almost 300. Who came forward to tell us their story. And from that, we've then been able to kind of piece together the start of the journey. So what prompts people to begin exploring the Christian faith, with the next stage, what helps along the way, who plays the most significant contribution, how long does that journey take, right through to the moment of conversion, what prompts people to finally make a decision to become a Christian, to repent and believe, and then a couple of questions afterwards as to what helps in the early stages as a disciple of Jesus. So that research was really helpful in this, helpful pinging together that whole piece of research. And we reckon it was the first of its kind for about 30 years. So it's been quite formative.
Yes, and I'd never read anything like it. It was so helpful, and just to have it laid out the different ways, but also the sort of the dominant ways, the big factors that sort of prompted people to start their journey to exploring the Christian faith, and what helped them, what hindered them. And how it was for them after they became Christians.
And what's really also beautiful helpful. Is they're all real people as well.
Well, I'll tell you what. I was doing a church weekend, and I was making reference to the Finding Jesus research, and I read out one of the stories. And at the coffee break, a woman came up to me and said that was me.
Fantastic.
And I thought what she meant was I was that category of person.
Yeah.
But she didn't. She went, no, that was me. That was my story.
Great. There you go. I'd like to meet her too, please.
Yes.
Nick, if you can introduce me, that's great. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, as I've shared that stuff with churches, they found it just so helpful, so encouraging. So thank you for their research. So the conference that we've got coming up in October, this year we've called it Pathways to Christ in a Time of Opportunity.
Yeah, great.
And lots of people are talking about the opportunity of this time, talking about a spiritual openness perhaps we've not seen for decades. What are you seeing as you travel around, as you talk to church leaders? What's the temperature in terms of openness to the gospel, interest in exploring faith in Christ?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm seeing is there's two ends of the spectrum and everything in between. So there's some people who are saying, actually, we're not seeing very much at all. Yeah. And there are some people who you'd believe we're on the edge of revival and everything in between. I think when it comes to what I think, if this is revival, I'm disappointed because I'd like revival to be better than this. Yeah. But it's certainly something. Yeah. And the reason I say it's something is that both the stats and the stories point to what I would call spiritual springtime. So I've had the great joy of reading C.S. Lewis's Narnia books with my sons and recently finished The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, where there's that beautiful moment where the winter ends and springtime comes. That's what it feels like a little to me in this moment. And so even from a data perspective, 2025 saw a timeline of 7 or 8 different marker points pointing to something new happening. There was the Quiet Revival, which was withdrawn, which comes out again in October at the time of the conference. So we'll see what happens there. But that was only one piece of research. There was a piece of research called Belief in Britain, which found that Gen Z were half as likely to be atheists as their parents or grandparents. There was a Times newspaper reporting that Bible sales had increased by 87% between 2019 and 2024. There was your own research that was really significant and backed up the findings after a lot of the other pieces of research had come out. There was a piece of research by Savanta Comres among students that found that of all students, 29% said they read the Bible at least once a week. This is a very different picture to say 10, 15 years ago. And then the other extraordinary thing which we observed was the number of national newspapers reporting churches were filling up and baptisms on the beach and lots of other factors like that, and reporting really positively about them. Yeah. And all of those things on the macro pointed something. But equally on the ground, I preach in a different church almost every week, interact with leaders almost every day. Yeah. And the stories that I'm hearing are really significant. So even just this morning was with a pastor who their church is a large church, but he said they had to turn away dozens of cars on Easter Sunday. That kind of thing wasn't happening. And alongside that, I would say the types of story have changed. So the kind of stories where you hear people turning up to church without really ever having been there before, not knowing why they're doing that, picking up a Bible, that increase in spiritual interest also seems significantly higher than previous generations.
I've been reflecting the other day. I began my role with Passion for Life in the autumn of 2023. And it just so happened, my first month in September that year, I went to the induction service of a new minister in a nearby church. And I was just chatting to another church leader afterwards, and he told me 4 stories of people who had just turned up at church, having had some sort of experience that led them there. One I remember was a guy who had just suddenly been convicted he should read the Bible. He'd ordered it off Amazon, it had arrived, he'd unpacked it, he'd read it, or began reading it, and just found himself in floods of tears, whether that was conviction of sin, whether that was just the joy of the gospel, what he was reading, I don't know. But such an impact on him, and he gets himself to church because he realizes he needs to learn more, to understand more about the Christian faith. Yeah.
And that is the thing about spiritual springtime. I think we'd say that growth is uneven and messy. Yeah. So in physical springtime, you've got late frosts, you've got regional variation. And I think the unevenness and messiness means that you've got some churches who are experiencing loads of this and some churches not so much. But even amongst kind of the churches in between, I would say those at the lower end of the spectrum are still experiencing something, maybe a slight increase in baptisms and people exploring. But then at the other end, there's some churches that are seeing really significant growth and people really exploring, much higher numbers at Christianity Explored, much higher numbers at carol services and Easter, etc.
In many ways, it sort of feels like quite a different context for doing evangelism compared to 5, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So what are sort of the missional trends that you see? What should churches be expecting, preparing for as they sort of look ahead to the next 12 months, 24, and so forth?
Yeah. So what we try and do as the Evangelical Alliance, every year we bring out in January what's called our missional trends, where we kind of, to some extent they're predictions, but what we're trying to do is kind of have a bit of a kind of temperature check on the openness to the gospel, but also a bit of a weather check to kind of say, well, what do we think are going to be the big themes based on what's been in terms of the year ahead? And so for this year, we've produced 5 trends. The first is we predicted it to be the most spiritually open year in living memory, based on the kind of the research that we've seen, and that timeline of research you can find on Missional Trends website. The second thing we did was look at the biblical hunger that we see, and actually, with the predicted more Bibles would be sold this year, and it's so funny when you do these things because that's already been vindicated because the report came out in February that the Bible sale up until 2024 were 87% increase. It's now 134%.
Yeah.
So the Bible sales are now at their highest since we started counting, basically.
Yeah. So I remember reading that 2025 the sales were 28% higher than the year before.
Right. I mean, just
a massive increase in
even despite the previous year. I mean, just amazing.
Yeah.
So that was the second one. The third one is around a little thing we've kind of alluded to already around spiritual experiences leading people to church. And so we've got some of the data to back that up. But equally, I would say the kind of stories that we've just been sharing. A few years ago, you might have heard that and then told it for the next 6 months because that was a really good example. At the moment, almost everywhere I go, there is a story like that. And I think if you're not yet experiencing it as a church, my suspicion is you will see that at some point over the months and years to come. And actually it's been really common in kind of in other parts of the world. It's just I think we're seeing it more in the West at the moment. The fourth one was around how we connect our community ministries and faith sharing. And so the trend is that churches that do that really well will see significant fruit. One of the questions we asked in the research was, what prompted you to begin exploring the Christian faith? The number one answer was that people said they needed help with life. So they would go to things like toddler groups or food banks. And where churches join up gospel sharing at that point, we predict we will see really significant fruit. And churches that do that really well are seeing real growth. And then the final piece was, all this new interest and openness and people turning up will provoke the church to think really well about discipleship. And in some ways, this is about kind of closing the back door as the open as more come through the open door. And I think the parable of the sower, I think, is really instructive at this time. How to create the best possible soil for the gospel to land on hearts so that produces the most fruit. Because inevitably, in those terms, we will see lots of people respond, but that discipleship question becomes really key. And the church's capacity to make disciples once people have given their lives to Jesus becomes a really important question.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, absolutely. That's really helpful. Should we just dig into those a little bit more?
Great.
So the first one, expecting the next year to be the most spiritually open that we've experienced. Just tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways it's about people's kind of openness or closeness to the gospel.
Yeah.
And so I think most of us have grown up in spiritual wintertime, where even kind of conversations with friends have been shut down quite quickly. People not willing to ask deeper questions. And I think what we can expect in conversations, what we can expect in terms of invitations to things like Christianity Explored or our carol services, we can expect a lot of a more friendly response. What I would say is that this openness to spiritual things is not just an openness to Christianity, it's an openness to everything. And so we're seeing, especially amongst young women, alternative spiritualities, the searches online for things that are really unhelpful in this area.
Yeah.
I think we need to be aware of that, but also be fearless in proclaiming Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life, amongst a smorgasbord of openness to spiritual things. I became aware of this on my road. I think in the training videos we did for Passion for Life, talked about kind of delivering Easter eggs, and this woman on the doorstep saying, "I've looked into Buddhism, I've looked into Islam," and my wife and I had the opportunity to say, "Okay, can we tell you our story? We're Christians."
Yeah.
And that opening a door for the gospel. That wasn't happening, I don't think, 10, 15 years ago. And I think it's that kind of openness that we're experiencing.
Yeah, yeah, which just creates such a different context
Right.
for our efforts to reach out with the gospel. Okay, so greater openness. Bible sale. I mean, I resonate with what you're saying about Bible sales from our own research.
Right. Yeah.
Because I think we asked people whether they would be interested in knowing more about the Bible.
Yeah.
And across the whole population, it's in excess of 20% say they'll be interested in knowing more about the Bible.
Yeah.
If you're looking at the younger demographic, the 18 to 24-year-olds, I think it's up at something like 40%.
Yeah.
So they're interested in knowing more about the Bible.
Yeah.
And in knowing more about Jesus.
Yeah.
So just tell us a bit more about the Bible sales thing.
Yeah, I mean, my personal take is I think people are looking for a firm foundation on which to stand.
Yeah.
In a world that is just, they're perceiving is falling apart.
Yeah.
And I think when there is a constant promise of new and progress that clearly has failed, people are looking for a story that they can live by, which has stood the test of time and is true.
Yeah.
So one of the questions we asked in the research was, what drew you most? What aspect of the gospel drew you most to Jesus? Mm-hmm. And amongst younger generations, they said that the gospel is true, profound, and beautiful. Yeah. Now, I think in a post-truth fake news world, people want a firm foundation on which to stand. I've experienced this with one of my friends who for 20 years has been nowhere with God, would have not called himself a Christian in the slightest. But 2 years ago, he reached out and said, I've kind of realised there's a God. It's an evangelist's dream, isn't it? But after that, a few weeks later, he decided to become a Christian. Yeah. But his story is, he says it, I looked around at the world and thought, what is going on? And we've been doing Bible study together on Friday mornings, and he's found the truth through the Word of God. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of that going on, but I think there are also a lot of competing narratives in our world at the moment, and we hold in our hearts and our hands the most important and compelling story the world has ever known. And I think we need a Bible confidence. Yeah. That means we can talk about it, but also we can share it. And again, equally evangelistically, I've heard of churches who've gone out on a Saturday morning with a sign saying free Bibles and a box full of Bibles. And they've given them all away by 11 o'clock. And people are like, are you really giving this? There's no catch. And say, no, give it. And because I think there's a real hunger there for truth. Yeah, yeah.
It's such a turnaround, isn't it? I mean, I think for so long, the cultural narrative was religion, Christianity, the Bible, that's the problem.
Yeah, right.
If only we could get rid of all that, things would be so much better.
Yeah, and some people still think that.
Many still think that. But then suddenly realizing, no, actually, things are just a mess. Yeah. And actually, maybe we've taken a wrong turn. Yeah. And get back, maybe Christianity, maybe in the Bible, there are some answers, not just problems. Yeah, right. Is just such a different change of perspective. Yeah. Really encouraging for us. Yeah, I was talking to a church leader just a few weeks ago who said after what they sort of planned after their carol service was that they would offer just an evening where he would do the Bible in an hour. So not come to some social event in a 5-minute epilogue. This is just going to be a whole hour on the Bible, the whole Bible story, what the message is. And they issued the invitation at the end of the carol services. The event took place and the place was packed with people just wanting to hear what the Bible had to say, what the message was. So spiritual openness, Bible engagement, people coming to faith through spiritual experiences, dreams even. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, the data is that in 1992, which is the kind of last meaningful study on how adults come to faith, similar question was asked, what started the journey? And 6% in 1992 said some kind of dream or vision or experience started the journey. Our research in Finding Jesus found that 28%, when we said what started the journey, 28% said some kind of spiritual experience. And I guess in terms of what that looks like, I met a guy a few years ago who said he was on holiday in Portugal, outside a shop, and he just said he had a vision or an experience of Jesus. Completely bewildered, no Christian background. So he gets home, Googles churches, fortunately found a really good Bible-believing one, turned up, and the pastor there led him to Jesus, and he got baptized a few months later. Now, when I heard that story a few years ago, I was like, wow, that feels new. But as I say, at the moment, I went through a season of just everywhere I went was some kind of story like that. So I remember turning up at church where some guy was like in the car park when I arrived, and he just said, I don't know what it is, I just feel like I needed to go to church this morning. And people where we've heard, places in like the Middle East where there's where there's unevangelized societies, and people have had visions of a man in white. I think that's happening more and more in our world, and the data would kind of back that up, and even have seen that in my own postcode. I've kind of been telling stories a little about that in terms of a pathway. And then in the last 6 months in our church, we've had 3 young men inexplicably drawn to read the Bible or have had some kind of dream that's prompted exploration. And we've been really encouraged by that. But I think my encouragement would be, especially welcome teams in churches. Are we ready for people to turn up? Because I think we will see people turn up at our churches over the next few years going, I don't really know what I'm doing here, but I really felt I should come to church this morning. And there might be something more behind that, but that's the kind, we're seeing that more and more.
And just so important that we're just ready for that. Right. People are primed to just respond in a helpful way, not an unhelpful way when people come up and arrive with that sort of story.
And being proactive in that situation. So, and I think especially as people press, sadly, into the darker side of spirituality, being ready to turn people away from that and towards Jesus. So a friend of mine was at a church, and he said this woman turned up and said on a Sunday morning, she said, I'm into manifesting, I'm into tarot, I'm into crystals, the lot. And she said she'd been at her sink doing the washing up, and she'd heard a voice say, I'm not the universe, I'm your God. So she turned up at the church and said, this voice said this, can you help me? And my friend said, come and take a seat. And then introduced her to Jesus. And that, I think we just need to be ready in those situations.
So that's the first 3 missional trends. Number 4 was around community ministries. So just explain what you mean by community ministries, and then what should we be thinking about in relation to community ministries?
So called community ministries, but what we mean is toddler groups, food banks, debt relief, wherever a church is meeting a human need. And by the way, the church reaches so many people, so many beneficiaries. Billions of pounds worth of social care are delivered by the church every single year. It's extraordinary. But when we ask people what prompted them to begin exploring the Christian faith, the number one answer was that they needed help with life. So that accessing Christians, getting to know the church through these ministries, the challenge is that not as many of these churches and ministries as we would like are connected to faith sharing and gospel sharing. So we as the Evangelical Alliance did some research where we asked our membership, hundreds of churches, how well connected are your community ministries and faith sharing? And just 25% said they have had a really cohesive link. So therefore, it's my conviction that if we increase that percentage, if more people who came to access these kind of ministries heard about Jesus, heard the gospel, we'd see hundreds of thousands more people come to know Jesus. And I think so the missional trend is that churches who do this really well will see significant fruit, and many more respond to the gospel.
Fantastic. Then the last trend, questions around discipleship that we raised for the churches by what's happening. Again, a bit more on that.
I think I was asked on the radio a few weeks ago whether I thought the UK church was ready for revival. And I said, I'm not sure. And the reason I'm not sure is I'm not sure whether the spiritual mothers and fathers we have in our churches, there are enough of them to disciple. If 1 million more people turn up at our church on Sunday, have we got the disciple-making relationships ready to go? And I think my personal take on discipleship is that it's not too complicated, but it is really costly and inconvenient. And it's relational. Even Jesus only invested in a few people and poured his life into them. In the end, I don't think one program is going to solve our discipleship need to walk alongside people, helping them to become apprentices of Jesus
Yeah.
and become wholehearted, lifelong disciples. And so I think, but what we are seeing is because we're seeing lots of people come in, even make decisions, exploring faith,
Yeah.
that's just going to cause us to ask really good questions about how have we got enough spiritual mothers, brothers, sisters and fathers within our churches to help people on the journey, but also how we have the frameworks and structures to help people become wholehearted disciples. And I think it's a nice new problem to have.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think it's what we need to keep asking and think really well about how we encourage spiritual disciplines, faithful preaching of the word of God, what our church relational structures look like. And also be honest that most people are discipled by their screens. So people are scrolling down their social media feeds. And we, in some ways, expect in a Sunday morning to counteract all the rest of it. And I think we just need to ask those questions around formation. And it's a new pathway and new ground that we need to think.
And even that teaching discernment around what people are watching online.
Right.
I mean, I was talking to one church leader just recently. He was saying, the YouTube can bring people to your church and just as easily take them away, as they are led down false pathways. And they need to be just shown how to be really discerning about. I mean, there's so much content out there. Some good, some bad. Thank you, Phil. Great to sit down and talk with you. We're looking forward to you speaking at the Evangelism conference in October. So we're in Glasgow on the 7th of October. We're in London on the 14th of October, talking about pathways to Christ in a time of opportunity. And the conference will be live streamed around the country to regional hubs, so you don't have to travel to Glasgow or London to access the conference. We'll be joined by Rico Tice and Nate Dawson also speaking, and we'd love you to join us at the conference in October.